Hello again, gamers. Welcome back to the Board Game Captain. I'm the Board Game Captain, and welcome to the first episode of How to GM. So I have game mastered many different role-playing game systems over the years, and I always found that it can be very difficult to start out game mastering, to figure out how to help run the game and make sure everybody has a good time. Especially for beginners, and the best way to get tips is from more experienced game masters. So that's what I hope to do with this series. So before we get started on this first episode, I just want to say that I am wearing one of my merchandise shirts here that says drink and I game, it's what I do, and has a mug of beer and a D20 on it. If you'd like to get this or other of my shirts or mugs, they're all available over on my Teespring store. There is a link in the description down below, and there will be a link at the end of this video. Okay, so for the topic of my first video, it's how to structure a campaign. So structuring a campaign can be tough, and this is one of those things that I feel a lot of role-playing game books don't go enough into, don't explain enough on how to do, and it can be very tough for new game masters to figure out how to make a whole campaign. Making a single game, by comparison, can seem quite easy. You come up with some motivation, some goals, some challenges, some bad guys. Doing a one-off game for like a party or a convention can be very easy in that regard. But when you're making a campaign, a group of connected games, it can be a little tougher. So I've got advice for two types of campaigns here. I've got a small, close-ended campaign versus a larger, more sprawling campaign. So for a closed-ended campaign, a tiny little small game, I think the best way to think of it when structuring your story arc and how you want your game to go is to think of it like a television miniseries. Now, when I'm saying a miniseries, I'm sure you're familiar with what I'm talking about. We're talking about probably 12 or less episodes, probably more like 6 or less, where there is a single story arc. Everything is very on topic. Every episode is all about what that main story is, and when it's done, it's done. So with this sort of game, you really do want to make sure your players know that that's the kind of game you're running. You want to all be on the same page. You're doing a single self-contained story about something, and every game is like one episode in that miniseries. And you get to the end, there's a concrete end, and it's over. It's not going to continue on. Now, these are actually fairly easy to do because you come up with one interesting arcing storyline idea, a reoccurring bad guy who's not going to be defeated, hopefully, until the very end, or if they are, there'll be someone else who is behind them. That's a good way to do that. If by chance your players manage to kill your big bad guy, make it that he was just the lieutenant of even a bigger bad guy, and they will be, have them introduced right away, and they'll be the bigger bad guy that they will then have to defeat later. So this is fairly self-explanatory. So if your overarching storyline is that these amazing, powerful artifacts were stolen, and you have to get them back, or the world is going to end, then every game is working towards that goal of trying to get them back from the main villain who's going to destroy the world, and you're going to save the world. I know this sounds like, like a actual miniseries, or maybe even the storyline of a JRPG, but that's actually what you want to go for when you're doing one of these self-contained miniseries type games. Now, far more often though, and far more ambitious, if you will, is the larger, a little bit more open-ended type campaign. So for these, think more ongoing, larger genre TV shows. Like, think of a season of Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's generally better to think towards older TV shows like from the 90s when the seasons were larger. Because a lot of modern shows, the series seasons have gotten a lot smaller. You can think of the more modern shows, but you may need to adjust your premise slightly in this regard. So now, in regard to these larger, a little bit more open-ended games, you're still going to have a big overarching story that you want to go towards. Probably a recurring villain, major goals, things everybody wants to work towards, but not every game now is going to be 100% on track, 100% going towards that. Because the thing about these larger seasons is you're going to have one-off episodes with like a monster of the week or a bad guy of the week or, you know, a little side story. These are really great. These one-off episodes are really great in working towards exploring a player's backstory. Maybe a player before the game really worked with you on talking about their big backstory, about how like their family was used to be rich and they lost everything because they were framed for a crime. And you know, you can do a one-off episode, a one-off game where you get back to that, where your character maybe on their travels they run into one of their other family members who is attempting to find evidence to prove that the family was framed, and you help them do that. These can be great for that. They can also just be great for little side quests, side stories, especially like, let's say, during a game, your players just go off track. They go off story. This can be the sort of thing you would discourage in more of a mini-series type game. But in a bigger open game like this, you can just be like, oh, I guess they're a little tired of the main story right now, and they found this one little side story thing I put in here, and they want to run with it. Let them run with it. I mean, even in the minier game, let them run with it too, because you know what? If your players are having fun, you're really doing your job right. That's what it comes down to. So if your players want to go off and do something totally off track, let them do it. But then in the next game, maybe have another bad guy or somebody or an NPC that needs help to try to draw them back into the main story then later. And I usually do it, depending on how long you want these to go, I usually do it that maybe you might have one or two on-story games followed by one that's off-story, that goes off and does whatever it wants. And if the players are the ones that instigate you having to fly by the seat of your pants and come up with stuff on the spot and do this off-story game, then yeah, I'll count that as the off-story game, and I might postpone one of the ones I'd planned for a little while. And eventually, doing this big arc, you'll eventually come to the big culmination, the big climax where they save the world, defeat the main villain, whatever it is. And then it again though, the season is ended. That's in the case of my analogy with a big season of a television show, that's the season finale. But that doesn't mean, in the case of these bigger, more open-ended games, that doesn't mean that has to be the end of the game. I recommend taking a little bit of a break when you hit that big climax, because it should be big, it should be important, you shouldn't rush right on to something else. But what you should do then is, during that break, you may have been thinking about this already, come up with your new arc, your new story arc for the next season. And your new story arc might have something to do with other characters or other events that have happened during the last big story arc, the last big season of your TV show, and some other villains and some other goings on. Now you can throw in a couple little one-offs, followed by suddenly introducing, you do the couple of one-off games, and then maybe the third game you introduce this thing that had happened, this character that had shown up way earlier in the first big story arc. Now they're a part of this other new big story arc, and you hook your players into that one, and you do it all again. You have another big story arc, planning another big culmination, another big season finale with, again, lots of little side stories. And these are great. So structuring your story like this gives a sense of cohesion. It gives something to strive for. It gives something for your players to look forward to. It gives an ongoing story where they're like, you know, I really want to know what's going on with this. And if your players, or when you're doing side stories, or saying things to you like, oh, that was fun, but I really want to get back to the main story, I want to know what's going on with that, then maybe do less side stories. Maybe turn them down and only have them happen once every 2 to 3 of the on-topic games, as opposed to 1 to 2 of them. And, you know, this is in my opinion and in my experience, a much better way to structure your campaign than just sort of going all willy-nilly and doing whatever you want. The problem with having just tons of one-offs and tiny little story arcs, almost like mini-series within the game, and just doing that, is that after a while, people start to lose their motivation because they lose their sense of where the game is going. There's no longer this cohesive storyline taking them to the season finale that everyone's excited to finally get for. Having these story arcs really seems to keep players motivated to keep coming back, keep wanting to play, and keep wanting to find out what's happening. So there you have it. That's my advice for how to structure a campaign in any role-playing game. This is totally functional in just about any system that is meant to be for more than just one-off games. Anything that has experience and leveling up in some way, anything that's meant to go on for campaigns, this will work in. So let me know in the comments down below, what do you think of my story structure? Do you have alternate ideas, different ways you like to structure your campaigns? Feel free to comment down below. And if you enjoyed this bit of how to GM, be sure to give it a like, share it on all forms of social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Captain. That's Captain spelled with a K on YouTube. And until next time, game on.